Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video. And today we're going to work out what books I want to read before the end of the year. So today I thought I would do a ridiculously ambitious end of the year TBR slash pile of possibilities, because why not? So I'm sat here at my TBR shelf. I haven't filmed a TBR at my TBR shelf for a while, and as you can see, it is out of control. There's a lot of chaos going on up here. There's actually some more TBR books behind this reading goals chart, but I thought I would show the reading goals chart at the beginning of the video. So there are 2 months left to go until 2024 is over. I'm filming this video on the 5th of November, so we're a few days into November, but not very far into November. And there are a lot of books I want to read by the end of the year, and there are a lot of goals I want to complete by the end of the year. And I also think I should have quite a lot of time to read and be able to read quite a lot of books in November and December. I have some time off over Christmas, and I still owe myself lots of time in lieu from a very busy period. I work freelance and I try and give myself time back in lieu if I work weekends. So I'm hoping I'll be able to take some time off to read. Meanwhile, as I said, my TBR is slightly out of control. I'm not doing very well on quite a lot of my reading goals. So I thought today I would have a strategical look at my TBR and work out how much progress I can make on my reading goals by the end of the year. I think I did a similar thing last year, and I feel like I was mediumly successful. So we're going to do it again this year. I find this very fun. I know that reading goals are not for everyone. That's completely fine. Personally, I love a good reading goal, and I find a reading goal and a challenge really motivating and really fun. I love a spreadsheet, and I love ticking things off. As well as loving reading. Looking back on my goals for 2024, I said that I wanted to keep my physical TBR down to 20 books. This is not 20 books, is it? My TBR is currently at 54 books. That's excluding the books I'm currently reading. My TBR was a lot better earlier on in the year, but I have acquired quite a few books over the last few months. I'll leave my recent haul video down below. But also recently, my husband Nick was going through all his childhood, teenage books and having a big sort out. And he just kept recommending and handing me books. So a good 7 or 8 books on my TBR shelf are those books. Do we think I can read 34 books from my physical TBR by the end of the year? Almost certainly not. But could I read 25? Maybe. And then one of my other goals for 2024 was to end the year with a TBR jar with less than 10 books in. So this is my TBR jar, or my TBR bucket, which has slips of paper on containing the names of all the books that were on my shelves before Christmas 2023. So it doesn't include books that are newer to my shelves. It only includes books that have been on my TBR for a while. There are currently 21 books in this TBR jar. So I think it's possible for me to get that down to 10 by the end of the year and to read 11 books from this jar. That seems plausible. Whether that is plausible with all the other goals I want to achieve, we'll see. And then another of my goals for 2024, I made a video just under a year ago now called Victorian books I want to read over 2024 and 2025. And I have been working my way through that list, but not very well. I wanted to be more than halfway through that list by the end of 2024. And of the 35 books, I have read 9 and I'm halfway through 1. Not making huge progress there, but I did think of a new way to motivate myself to dedicate more time to that challenge, and that is that I have created myself another TBR jar. This is my Victorian literature TBR jar, because I feel like one of the reasons why I sometimes don't get to Victorian literature outside of Victober is because I have so many books in my physical TBR and I feel more pressure to read them. So I thought I would up the pressure on the Victorian literature and make myself a new TBR jar of the Victorian books. So the idea being that come 2025, I will pick a title out every month and read a Victorian book every month. And if you have noticed that there are in fact 3 TBR jars here, that's because I also thought that I would make myself an Anthony Trollope TBR jar. Because as I said in my Anthony Trollope check-in during Victober, I would like to finish reading all of Anthony Trollope's novels by the end of 2025. I've got 9 of his novels left to read out of the 47 that he wrote, and there are also 2 novels I want to reread, and a short story collection and his autobiography, though I'm not going to read his autobiography until I've read everything else. But yes, I thought I would make myself an Anthony Trollope TBR jar to help me select which Anthony Trollope books to read next too. Another goal that I had for 2024 was for 15% of my reading to be books in translation and to read from 25 plus countries, which I am not doing so well on. I had a look at what I've read so far this year, and I've read like 6% in translation, which is really not very much at all, which is really sad because I really enjoy reading in translation, and I feel like you get to read some interesting and different things when you're reading in translation. And I'm disappointed that I have read so little in translation this year. I have read from 16 countries, which obviously is a long way behind 25, but is better than my translation goals. So I'm slightly disappointed with that. I hope I will make some progress on those goals by the end of the year, but like I'm not going to catch up to where I want it to be, and that is okay. I like to have a lot of reading goals because I find it really interesting, and it is fun for me, but like you're not always going to succeed on every goal. I would like to make that more of a priority for next year, but on the other hand, I feel like my really big priority for next year is to finish reading all of Anthony Trollope's books. So we will see how I go. And then my other big reading goal thing, of course, is that I have this ridiculous goals spreadsheet, which I absolutely love and find so fun. I thought it would be fun to blue tack it to my bookshelf so you could see it as I talk, but I realise it's probably absolutely tiny and you can't really see any of the writing. So I'll probably scan it in and put it up on the screen as well. I'm doing okay on my spreadsheet. There are some goals that I've ticked off a lot of things for. There are some goals where I have some big gaps. There are still 82 boxes unticked on my goals spreadsheet. And even if every book I read counted for 2 goals, I'm still almost certainly not going to tick everything off by the end of the year, and that's fine. This is always meant to be a fun like stretch challenge rather than something I'm actually intending to complete all of. Like I always know that when I do this kind of goal spreadsheet there are more boxes that I'm going to tick off, but I would like to make a dent in it, and there are a few goals I would like to read more towards. So let's work out what I think is achievable during the last 2 months of the year, bearing in mind that I also have various other reading commitments and would like to take part in Nonfiction November. So I'm taking down my goals spreadsheet to reveal the other little few books on my TBR. It's just like this shelf and this half of this shelf. Beyond the bit you can't see some other books. They're like my Victorian history reference books rather than TBR books. But yes, let's have a look at what I want to read. So let me start off by telling you about what I'm currently reading. There are 2 books that I have been reading all year on and off, both of which are Victorian. So here we have Varney the Vampire by James Malcolm Ryder, which is a Victorian penny dreadful vampire novel. And we also have London Labour and the London Poor by Henry Mayhew, a non-fiction journalist account of basically what it says in the title. I am really liking both of these books. Varney the Vampire is huge fun. London Labour and the London Poor is really interesting, but I'm only halfway through both of them and I would kind of like to finish them by the end of the year. And then I have one other book that I'm halfway through and have been reading for ages, and that's this. This is Asians in Britain, 400 Years of History by Rosina Visram. So this book is all about people from the Indian subcontinent moving to Britain, living in Britain, their descendants, and it looks back on 400 years of history. And I have been reading this for historical research. So I read the sections on the 18th and 19th century up until the First World War and tabbed a lot of stuff, and it was fascinating, but then it got into the 20th century and it was no longer relevant for my historical research for my writing, so I kind of stopped reading it, but it's a really fascinating book and I would like to finish it because it's really, really interesting. Even the bits that I'm not reading for historical research, I still really want to read. So I want to finish this by the end of the year too. Then I have also started this other massive thing. This is The Lifted Veil, Women's 19th Century Short Stories. This is a collection of short stories, some of which I have read before and some of which I haven't. And the ones I've read before, I don't feel a need to reread most of them, but I read one story that I hadn't read before from this in Victober, The Lifted Veil, and I would like to read the rest in November and December, hopefully, if I can. And then I also am currently listening to 2 audiobooks. So Nick and I are listening to The Murder at the Vicarage by Agatha Christie together, the first Miss Marple book. This is a review for me. I've read it before. We've only got 2 hours left. And then I'm also listening to Beach Read by Emily Henry at the moment, which is just pure joy. She just writes fantastic rom-coms that are really, really funny, really heartwarming and moving, also deal with a lot of serious themes and have the right balance of love and other stuff in life within them, and they're just fantastic. And then the physical book I'm currently mostly reading is this. This is Midnight at Malabar House by Vaseem Khan. This is a historical murder mystery, and this is the pick for my historical fiction book club over on Patreon this month. And I am a few chapters into this, really enjoying it so far. So those are the books I'm currently reading. It'd be nice to finish them all by the end of the year. It'd be nice to finish London Labour and the London Poor and Asians in Britain, 400 Years of History during Nonfiction November if I can. If you don't know know about Nonfiction November, by the way, I'll link down below the announcement video from Olive at A Book Olive, who runs Nonfiction November, and it is, yeah, a readathon all about nonfiction, as it says on the tin. And then I have a few other like reading commitments, read along kind of things happening in the last 2 months of the year. So as I said, Midnight and Malabar House is the November pick for my Patreon book club, but the December pick is a book I have on my TBR, and that's The Winter Spirits, Ghostly Tales for Frosty Nights by lots of different authors. I'm really looking forward to this. I really enjoyed The Haunting Season, which came out the year before and was a kind of similar premise. And I'm meaning to read this for a while, so this will definitely be read in December. And then I'm also going to be rereading Dickens's 5 Christmas novellas for my Mega Dickens Christmas read-along. If you want more information about that, I'll leave links down below, and I'll leave links to the Discord server as well if you want to come along and join. But we're going to be reading A Christmas Carol, The Chimes, The Cricket on the Hearth, The Battle of Life, and The Haunted Man and The Ghost Bargain. They're all quite short. I've read them all before. I'm going to listen to them all in audiobook, so that shouldn't put too much of a strain on my general reading. Actually, while I remember, the very nice people at Audrey, who are an audiobook app, have given me an offer code for an audiobook of A Christmas Carol. So if anyone taking part in the Mega Dickens Christmas read-along, or just anyone who wants to read A Christmas Carol this October wants to try a audiobook from Audrey, narrated by Kyle Munley, and with a reading guide and context from Dr. Nat Reeve, who actually wrote A Nettle Black, which is somewhere on my TBR shelf just out of sight. But if you want to listen to A Christmas Carol, if you use the code Christmas Carol KTL-2024 with the capitalization, as I'll put it on the screen and down in the description. If you use that code on Audrey, then you can get a free audiobook. You will need to download the app first, but it is free to download. I'm really looking forward to listening to that audiobook myself, and I'm really looking forward to rereading the other Dickens Christmas books. And now we come to Nonfiction November, because as I said, Nonfiction November is taking place in November, and I would really like to take part. I feel like there are so many other things that I want to read that Nonfiction November is not exactly my priority this year, but I do know that this is the last year that Olive is going to host it, so I would really like to take part. Every year Olive comes up with 4 words that act as the prompts for Nonfiction November, and this year the words are code, path, shot and join. I don't know how much the books I have chosen really fit in with these prompts, but as I am partly doing Nonfiction November this year in order to join in with the last Nonfiction November hosted by Olive, I feel like every single book I read for it can count for the prompt of join. So there's that. I have some non-fiction books on my TBR. Do I know where they are? Yes, I do. In fact, they're both pretty accessible. I only have 2 non-fiction books on my physical TBR. So here we have Novelist as a Vocation by Haruki Murakami. I would really like to read this year. It's only 200 pages long. I feel like I haven't read as much Japanese literature as I want to read this year. While I have mixed feelings about the Murakami novels that I have read so far, I do always find it really interesting to read writers writing about writing, so I'm going to read this before the end of the year, hopefully. Am I actually going to read any of the books I say I'm going to read by the end of the year? We'll see. And the other non-fiction book I have on my TBR is this. This is Avoidance, Drugs, Heartbreak and Dogs by Jordan Stevens. So this is, well, it's a proof copy, but obviously it came out in August 2024. I went along to an influencer event that Can and Gate hosted a while ago, and this was one of the books that they gave away. And this is a memoir about mental health and masculinity by Jordan Stevens, who used to be part of Rizzle Kicks. I'm not sure that I would have gone out and bought this book myself, but it was really exciting to have a proof, because Jordan Stevens was at this event and was interviewed and was just so interesting and said so many interesting things. So I really want to read this, and I would quite like to read it before like the memory of that event fades from my mind, if you know what I mean. And then also on my pile of possibilities for Nonfiction November, I have a digital proof of a book called Charles Dickens, The Stories of His Life by Jesper Sorensen, which is partly a biography of Charles Dickens, but also kind of looking at how his life influenced his books and the books he was writing at various points in his life, and kind of comparing the two, I suppose, which sounds like a really interesting premise for a biography. And then there are 4 books that are Nonfiction November pile of possibilities, more than an active TBR. I think I'll probably read one of these, but I don't think I'll read all of them. And I have 3 of these on audiobook, and one of them, I think if I were to read it, I would probably get it on audiobook. So we have The Anglo-Saxons by Mark Morris, which is a history book about the Anglo-Saxons. Nick's read this and recommended it to me. There's also The Restless Republic by Anna Kay, which is a history book about the aftermath of the English Civil War in the 17th century and about the 11 years in which Britain had no king or queen. There's also Empire Land, How Imperialism Has Shaped Modern Britain by Sathnam Sanghera. This is one that's been on my radar for ages. I feel like the title and subtitle tells you exactly what that book is about. And then the final non-fiction book that I wanted to put on my vague pile of possibilities, which I almost certainly will not get to in November, and that is The Mystery of the Parsi Lawyer, Arthur Conan Doyle, George Aylgi, and the Case of the Foreigner in the English Village by Shrabini Basu. To explain what this book is about, when I was reading Asians in Britain, 400 Years of History, which is fascinating, as I said, I came across this case. And George Aylgi was a British lawyer of Indian descent who in 1903 was falsely accused and convicted of killing farmers' livestock, basically because the police were exceptionally racist. And Arthur Conan Doyle, you know, known as a great detective writer, got involved in his defence. So it's a really fascinating story. I just want to read more about this. So I feel like this would be a really, really interesting non-fiction book to read. Am I going to get to it before the end of the year? Almost certainly not. So that's my non-fiction November pile of possibilities. Is this going to be the longest TBR video ever? Possibly. And then there are quite a few new releases or proofs that I have on my shelves that I would like to get to. I have quite a few proofs that have been on my shelves for a while, where the book's already come out and I still haven't read it and I feel quite bad. So as I said, there is the Dickens non-fiction book that I have a digital proof of. Then I also have a digital proof of That's What She Said by Eleanor Pilcher, which is a women's fiction book about two best friends. This one is coming out in 2025, I think. Then I have a few other proof copies here and there. Let me see if I can pull them from my shelves. So I have here 4 proof copies. So When Things Went Dark by B. Fitzgerald is a thriller that came out in September. I am really looking forward to this. I think this would be a really fun, twisty-turny book. And another book that came out in September and I still haven't read, this is Broken Ghost by J.D. Oswald, which is a gothic coming-of-age story. Sounds excellent. We've also got The Undoing of Violet Claiborne, which comes out next week, maybe this week when you're seeing this. And this is a gothic mysterious story set in the 1930s about a young girl who is invited to a friend's crumbling mansion for Christmas. Sounds very intriguing. And then I also would quite like to get to this soon. This is The Woman in the Wallpaper by Laura Jones, coming out in February 2025. This is a work of historical fiction set during the French Revolution. If I count all of the Dickens Christmas novellas as one book, then that takes us to 21 books that I would theoretically like to read by the end of the year. I think I'm gonna extend this TBR to 40 books and see how many of my Crazy Girls reading spreadsheet books I can read. Am I gonna actually get to 40 books by the end of the year? Probably not, but we'll see. Obviously, quite a few of those books would tick off various goals on my goals spreadsheet and would take my TBR down by some books. But let's see how many other goals I think I can tick off from my Crazy Goals spreadsheet. So to start off with the classics, when it comes to Victorian literature, I'm doing okay. I have 2 slots left on my Anthony Trollope category, and I think I would quite like to read the only Trollope book on my physical TBR, which is this. This is a lovely edition of some Trollope short stories, The Two Heroines of Plumplington and Other Stories. And this includes a Christmas story that I have read before, Christmas at Thompson Hall, but that might be quite nice to reread near Christmas. So I think I would like to read this in December. Am I going to read another Anthony Trollope book before the end of the year? Possibly not. Quite a lot of his books are quite long, but let me pick one out of the Anthony Trollope TBR jar just in case, and we'll see what I come out with. The Fixed Period. The Fixed Period, I believe, is quite a short Anthony Trollope book, and I think it's also like a utopian Anthony Trollope book slash dystopian Anthony Trollope book, so quite unusual. So I would quite like to read that this year, and I don't think that would take me very long. I may be misremembering, but if it is the short one that I think it is, then I will try and read it before the end of the year. Although saying that, I keep forgetting that my Kindle is being very temperamental lately. It kept glitching, and I kept having to reset it while I was reading Mr. Scarborough's Family by Anthony Trollope in Victober, and I don't know if that file particularly was glitchy or whether my Kindle is just dying. So maybe that I'm not reading very much from my Kindle in the imminent future, but we will see. Then I still have 5 boxes for other Victorian literature. Obviously, if I finish Henry Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor and Varney the Vampire, that would tick off 2 more boxes. Do I want to read another 3 Victorian books before the end of the year? Maybe. So one thing I would actually really like to read before Christmas is this. So this is The Open Door and Other Stories of the Seen and Unseen by Margaret Oliphant, which is a ghostly collection of short stories by Margaret Oliphant. For the Victorians, ghostly meant Christmas. So I don't 100% know that this is going to be festive and wintry and Christmassy, but it probably is. So I think I'm going to try and read that before the end of the year. And talking of Christmassy Victorian things, I also have an audiobook of The Christmas Hirelings by Mary Elizabeth Braddon, which is her Christmas novella, which I think is only like 4 hours. So that won't take me very long and will be fun and festive. So I would definitely like to try and read that before the end of the year. So that leaves me with one Victorian box to tick. Am I going to tick that off by the end of the year? I don't know, but let's pick something out of my Victorian TBR jar just in case. The Roar of the Sea by Savin Baring-Gould, which is on my Victober TBR and I failed to read. And I don't think it's that long, so I would really like to read this by the end of the year. I'm going to move these down actually because they're blocking access to my massive TBR. Looking down my reading goals spreadsheet, when it comes to British non-Victorian classics, I have one box left to tick off for books published between 1900 and 1950. And as I said, I'm currently reading Murder at the Vicarage by Agatha Christie, so that goal is ticked off. I'm not going to worry about my 2 empty boxes on pre-1837. That is fine for this year. But when it comes to British classics from between 1950 and 1990, I do have some children's classics, which I think could fill that gap. So here I have out from the library The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper. This is part of a series. I read the first book a few months ago and really enjoyed it. I wanted to read this series because I know that Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf really loved them. And I gather that The Dark is Rising is set at Christmas time, so I feel like it would be nice to read it this Christmas while it is seasonal. And this book is from 1973, so that would work for that prompt. And then, as I said, Nick was recommending me a lot of his childhood favourites earlier this month, and quite a few of them were Diana Wynne Jones books. So I might read some Diana Wynne Jones before the end of the year. The shortest Diana Wynne Jones book I have on my shelf is this. This is The Time of the Ghost from 1981. I don't know much about it, but that's a slightly creepy cover, and I might give it a read before the end of the year. Moving on to my International Classics Challenge, I'm doing really badly here, and this is probably like one of my big focuses for the last 2 months of the year. So every year I pick a few countries and try and read a few books from them. So my first country is Canada, and I've read 2 books from Canada so far, so I want to read 2 more. I've got an audiobook, The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery, which I'm hoping to listen to very soon. And then I reserved at the library The Diviners by Margaret Lawrence, but I requested it at the library quite a long time ago and it hasn't come in, which usually means the book is lost somewhere. So I might be wrong about that, but I might need to find myself a different Canadian classic to read by the end of the year. And then I've read 2 classics from Nigeria so far, so I want to read 2 more. I've got these 2 out of the library right now. So here we have No Longer at Ease by Chinua Achebe. So this is the sequel to Things Fall Apart, which I read I guess a good 10 years ago, but I'm really interested to read this one. This is from 1960, I think. And I also got this other Nigerian modern classic. This one is from 1979, I think, and this is The Joys of Motherhood by Buchi Emecheta. I don't know too much about this, but I've heard very good things, so looking forward to that. And then when it comes to the Philippines, which is my final country for my International Classics Challenge this year, I have 2 books on my physical TBR and 1 on my Kindle as well. So here we have The Woman Who Had Two Navels and Tales of the Tropical Gothic by Nick Joaquin, which I've been meaning to read for a few months and definitely want to read before the end of the year. And then I also have this. This is A Child of Sorrow by Zoilo Galang, which is very short, shouldn't take me very long. Definitely want to read this as well. Then the final classic from the Philippines I have on my Kindle, presuming my Kindle works, is Florence at Laura by Francisco Balagtas, which is a work of poetry. When it comes to reading other international classics, I'm not doing very well at all. I feel like I just haven't been reading classics from around the world in the way that I want to this year. I do have a couple on my shelves which I might read before the end of the year. So here we have The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, which I've been meaning to read for goodness knows how long, and I am especially meaning to read it this year because I really want to read James by Percival Everett, and I feel like I should read this first. And then I would also quite like to read The Story of the Stone Volume 2, which I feel like has been in every TBR video I've done this year. Basically, it's just quite long and quite dense, but I enjoyed the first volume of The Story of the Stone, and I really want to continue, and I really don't want to have forgotten Volume 1 entirely by the time I read Volume 2. I feel like maybe I need to just try and read this over Christmas when I'm off work and like have some time, but I'll see how I go. And then I also have the Swedish classic A Book for Christmas by Selma Lagerlöf on its way to me currently, I think. So hopefully I'll read that before Christmas as well. I believe that's pretty short. And I also have an audiobook of a book from Zimbabwe from 1988. So that's probably just about a modern classic maybe. And that is Nervous Conditions by Zitzi Dangarembga. And I also have an ebook of an Indian classic feminist work from 1905 called Sultana's Dream. I've been meaning to read that for ages as well, and I think that is really short, so theoretically I might read that before the end of the year. I am now up to 39 books for my pile of possibilities that I thought would be 40 books, and I still have a lot of goals to look through, but we're going to keep going anyway. This video is going to be exceptionally long. Moving on to my modern fiction prompts. When it comes to modern historical fiction, I have ticked off everything already. The only thing I succeed at when it comes to my reading goals is reading a bunch of historical fiction. And I've also, ticked off all my historical crime and mystery boxes, so that's good. Am I still going to probably read some more historical fiction in the last few months of the year? No doubt. When it comes to my modern fiction other prompts, when it comes to rom-coms, I have one box left, but I'm currently listening to Beach Read by Emily Henry, so that will definitely tick that off. There is a Christmas rom-com that I would kind of like to read as well, which is Make You Mine This Christmas by Lizzie Huxley Jones, because I meant to read it last Christmas and then ran out of time, and it's a Christmas rom-com. I only really want to read it in December. So am I going to read it this year? We will see. I've only read one work of science fiction or fantasy this year, which is very sad. I do have 2 science fiction books on audiobook that I could read before the end of the year, but that will depend on what else I listen to and audiobook time. I do feel like I tend to have a lot of audiobook time in December because I tend to do a lot of baking and Christmas shopping, and I tend to listen to audiobooks while I do this kind of thing. So the 2 science fiction audiobooks I could listen to, one is Record of a Spaceborne Few by Becky Chambers. I've read the previous 2 books in the series, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet and A Closed and Common Orbit, and I love them both. And I just haven't read on with the series, so I do really want to read that soon. And then I'd also really like to reread Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. Basically, I read Ancillary Justice 10 years ago and loved it, and just never read the rest of the series. And I really want to read the rest of the series, but I don't feel like I can read the second book in the series without rereading the first. So I might reread Ancillary Justice at some point in the next few months. We will see. When it comes to crime or mystery books, modern ones rather than historical, I have 2 boxes left. When Things Went Dark by B. Fitzgerald would definitely tick off one of those boxes. So shall I select another contemporary mystery from my TBR to read? I might read You Don't Know Me by Imran Mahmood, which I bought back in July, which is a crime novel in the form of someone's testimony during their trial. I've heard great things about this, so I would kind of really like to read this year, but, as I said, ridiculous pile of possibilities, but that's part of the fun, right? When it comes to modern books from around the world, I'm doing okay on my goals, but not massively well. I feel sad that I've only read 2 works of Japanese literature this year, so let's see if I can try and make amends for that in the last few months of the year. Obviously, one of the non-fiction books I mentioned, Novelist as a Vocation by Haruki Murakami, would tick off one box here. And then I also have 2 very short Japanese novels on my shelf, which I'm sure I can get to by the end of the year. Look how tiny they are. So here we have This Is Amako Jiu copy by Natsuko Imamura, and here we have The Kamigawa Food Detectives by Hisashi Kashiwa. I feel like I can definitely read these 2 tiny books by the end of the year, so let's try and do that. What's going to happen here is I'm going to have this massive end of the year pile of possibilities, and I'm going to read all the shortest books from it. Then I will tick off that final USA box with Beach Read by Emily Henry. And when it comes to other books from around the world, my physical TBR is very British, which, on the one hand, that makes sense. I live in the UK and I also work in the UK publishing industry, so I end up with a lot of British books. But I do feel like one of the reasons why I never end up doing as well as I want to on international reading challenges and translated fiction is because I'm always trying to get on top of my physical TBR, and my physical TBR is always dominated by usually British historical fiction, which obviously I love, and that's the market I write in, so I do want to keep on reading lots of British historical fiction. But I feel like if my TBR was under control, I would read more internationally, but I also feel like my TBR is just never under control, so maybe I should just forget about having a TBR that's under control. Anyway, the point of that is that I don't think my physical TBR is going to help me much here. But I do have on my Kindle the South Korean novel Kim Ji-young, born 1892 by Cho Nam-ju. If my Kindle still works, I could hypothetically read that before the end of the year. I think that one actually is very short too, so maybe I will. When it comes to my 2024 to 2025 new releases, I have 3 boxes left, and the review copies I have will easily tick that off, so I don't need to worry about that goal there. And then when it comes to my not a novel goal, as you will see, there is a lot of white space here. To be honest, I don't really mind about that at all. Basically, I had set my play, short stories and poetry goals really high this year because I was in a book club where we were reading a short story, a poetry collection and a play every month, and then we all just got exceptionally busy in 2024 and it didn't happen. I set those goals high because I was expecting to be in a book club that would be ticking off all those goals, so I don't really mind that I haven't done that much on these goals. I have read 7 plays, which is still pretty good, and I have read a lot of short story collections. In fact, if I read The Winter Spirits, The Open Door, The Lifted Veil, and the Ashley Trollope short stories, then I will have gone beyond ticking off the short stories there, so that's nice. As you can see, I also read a comic and a graphic novel this year, so I added a little extra category, which I will definitely put in properly next year. When it comes to poetry, I am really sad that I've only read 4 poetry collections this year. So one of the classics I mentioned from the Philippines earlier is a work of poetry, and then I also raided my husband Nick's poetry shelves and stole 3 books. He reads a lot more poetry than I do, and he has recommended these 3 to me. So here I have Bright Fear by Mary Jean Chan, Serious Concerns by Wendy Cope, and also Gold from the Stone by Lem Sisse. These 3 are pretty short. Poetry is always quick to read. I really hope I'll finish these 3 by the end of the year. When it comes to non-fiction, I only have 2 boxes left to tick off, and I've spoken about a lot of non-fiction, so I will very easily tick off those boxes. And now, with already a stupid pile of possibilities of 49 books, I come to my TBR jar pick. I'm just gonna have a look through the books I have pulled off my shelves already and see how many of them would count for TBR jar prompts, and also how many books that would leave on my physical TBR. So of the 49 books I've spoken about so far, 17 of them are from my physical TBR, and 5 of them are like long-term physical TBR books that would come out of my TBR jar. So that's not really achieving my goals, is it? Do I want to pick some other books out of my TBR jar and just round this up to 55? Because we know that I'm not going to read more than like 30 books before the end of the year, but I may as well have a ridiculous pile of possibilities. It's already so ridiculous that I feel like I might as well just make it more ridiculous. Let's pick 6 more books out of the TBR jar, which would get my TBR jar down to 10 books if I also then read the 5 that I've already picked out. Obviously, I'm not going to read all of these books. I think we all know that. What have we got? The Story of the Stone. Forever. Maybe this is a sign that I actually need to read The Story of the Stone. Anyway, that's already on my TBR. The Hollow Sea by Anna Kirby. Where have you gone, Hollow Sea? Oh, here you are. This has been on so many TBRs this year. Am I actually going to read it before the end of the year? Almost certainly not. Putting it in my pile anyway. What next? We have The Way It Breaks. The Way It Breaks by Hollis Loiseau. I'll put this on my massive stack of doom that's about to fall over any minute. The Trollope short stories, obviously already on my TBR. I had also actually forgotten that I'd had them for that long, so that means I already have more that would count for my TBR jar, but we're just going to keep going at this stage. This Wild Wild Country. Oh yes. This is This Wild Wild Country by Inga Vesper. This is a proof copy. I used to work at the publisher's Manila Press, and I actually read an early version of this book, but I never read the final version, and I really wanted to. So this has been sat on my shelf for ages, and I do really want to read it at some point. The Seal Woman's Gift by Sally Magnuson also has been on so many TBRs this year. Will I read it before Christmas? Almost certainly not. Adding it to my stack. Basically, I feel like this video has actually just become me tidying up a priority list of my physical TBR, and then I'm going to rearrange these shelves and I'll know what books I want to read over the next like 5 months rather than 2, but there we go. Here we have Good Girls Die Last by Natalie Simmons, which is a thriller that again I have a proof copy of, although it came out in 2023. I would really like to read this one. I think it'll be really fun, and this probably actually would be a really fast read, so maybe I could read this before the end of the year. We're going to pick out one more book from the TBR jar because at this rate I just am embracing the chaos. The Awakenings. The Awakenings by Sarah Main is a gothic novel that I have a proof copy of. I wasn't sent this by the publishers, I was given this by someone else, and it's been sitting on my shelves for a while. It's not very long. and I think it'll be gothic and mysterious, so maybe I will also give this a try. As we can see, this video has been complete chaos. I underestimated how many goals I had left to tick off. This video has basically gone from being a end of the year pile of possibilities to like a next 4 months pile of possibilities, but that is fine. I am going to sort out the chaos that is my TBR shelf into an order of priorities, and then I will report back. So I've tidied up my TBR shelf. I just fully embraced the double stacking on this TBR bookshelf for now. Can I get this down to something more reasonable by the end of the year? Possibly. Here are 55 books that I will read half of by the end of the year, and that's fine. A pile of possibilities with twice the amount of books I'm actually going to read, that seems okay to me. I reckon I could read 30 to 35. Possibly. Regardless, this has been a fun exercise, which has been useful to remind me that I know that my goals are ridiculous and that that is part of the fun. I feel like this has been one of the longest and rambliest videos I've ever made. That is all. In fact, that is more than enough for now. So thank you very much for watching this nonsense. Do let me know down in the comments, are there any of these books that you have especially loved that I really need to prioritize? And otherwise, I'll be back very soon with a slightly less rambly bookish video. The Steel Woman's Gift by Sally Magnuson. This again, like the Hollow Sea. The books attacked me. They're fighting back.